What is going on here? Has Lando Norris been told something that he really didn't want to hear? And is this just playing into the hands of Max Verstappen? Because, yes, I have no idea why McLaren's making a mountain out of a molehill. Given McLaren's recent social media damage control spree, this could easily be another round of that to restore control of the narrative. A PR exercise. All of this being dominated by Oscar and Lando fans going at each other's throats. And, as I mentioned, one Max Verstappen really making a little bit of a joke out of it in the recent Thursday press conference before Austin, so quite frankly, people, get your phones of doubt ready, because this could all be some sort of publicity stunt to try and look fair, but I think deep down there might have been a little bit of wrapping of the knuckles on Norris's part, and we'll get to it later in the video. But at the same time, Sky Sports' thumbnail told the story in its own way before the words did. Lando looking downbeat, Oscar looking calm. They wanted you, Sky Sports, to think Norris was in trouble. And the specific term being bandied about and people going hysterical over is the word repercussions. That there would be repercussions on Lando's part. The primary definition for the word being an unintended consequence of an event or action, especially an unwelcome one. I'm not gonna lie that this does seem a little bit on the heavy-handed side given the situation of the particular incident at Marina Bay, that, yeah, they did make contact, but neither driver was looking likely to take each other out. In fact, you'd be really arguing that the word repercussions could have been said after the Canadian Grand Prix. That had a far graver consequence because that was self-inflicted and one car did ultimately end up retiring from the event. But no, back then it was labelled as a simple misjudgment. But in any case, you really want to know the proper verbiage that Norris used to explain what repercussions there actually were. So here they are for your consideration. Well, it has got nothing to do with you guys, but of course, there were talks, which were inevitable, and the team held me accountable, which I think is fair. Then we made progress from there on, understanding what the repercussions were for myself, and to avoid something definitely worse happening than what did. As I said after Singapore, this is the last thing I want to happen, is to cause these kinds of controversial talks after the race, and I put just as much risk of putting myself out of the race as whoever I am racing against, whether it is Oscar or anyone else. So it is clearly something I want to avoid. Oh, and by the way, Piastri was asked about what Lando said, and he said that indeed there were talks and that there were indeed repercussions for Lando, which were going from the discussions that were brought after the race that Andrea Stella was talking about trying to rebuild the trust process. And I know that many Lando fans are suddenly going to be bringing up, well, why weren't there major discussions after Monza 2024? Well, I do get what you're saying here, because that was a moment when positions were compromised. But you just got to look at the receipts, my friend. Feel free to look back at the footage. Piastri, in that overtake, did not make contact. Lando did go wide, but they did not make contact. That is what hard, clean racing McLaren is striving for. And in his mind, he followed the rules of engagement, Oscar. But in Singapore, Norris did make contact, albeit unintended. The repercussion of lightly tagging the back of Verstappen's car, but it's proved to be something that he wouldn't hear the last of for a while, from all circles. And I still really don't understand why McLaren waited to change their position after the fact that points were awarded, that, oh, at the time, they said that, oh, it was a racing incident, that, oh, it's up to Oscar to try and catch up to Lando, whereas now, they're actually pointing the blame at a particular driver, instead of just saying it was a racing incident. But I think you are in agreement with me that the actual incident itself, Lando tagging the back of Max and then going into Oscar, it is a bit of a mountain out of a molehill situation. McLaren is producing the spades and plant equipment for us to add more dirt to that particular molehill. It's doing it to themselves, all around a very, very small core that we have seen time and time before within Formula One, and it's only going to provide fodder for various other drivers, including Max Verstappen. You know the one, the joke where he thought that, oh, yeah, not Oscar is the favourite driver, that he'd heard about that it was all said with a smile and it was all there for the world to see and to chew over. This coming off the back of Verstappen's immediate scoffing of the Monza position swap when GP told him over the radio. when this was all happening behind him. And every time Max drags McLaren's internal politics into the spotlight, laughing as he does so, he shifts the focus away from Red Bull and its own recovery efforts, and back into his rivals' insecurities. The onus is on McLaren and their internal worries. It's psychological warfare 101. Max is bringing all guns blazing right here, because he's making favouritism the story, not what Red Bull are up to. And Max is also ensuring that Lando continues to race with a chip on his shoulder, whereas Oscar Piastri, oh no, he's good, he's fine, he can just continue to race on his own volition. And honestly, this means that Red Bull doesn't really need to build a faster car than McLaren's if they are trying to, McLaren, not try and point fingers as to who's the favourite in the garage. Anyway, Norris's main comments tell you two things at the same time. That after a formal investigation was made, after everything had calmed down, accountability was formally assigned to him for the contact, no longer mirroring what the FIA deduced as it being merely lap 1 chaos. Because let's remember, the FIA did look into it, the stewards did decide something, and they collectively just went like, racing incident, oh well. And then McLaren followed suit. But now McLaren aren't following suit. They have actually been able to pin the blame on one of their own. It most certainly isn't just a one-time thing like a fine or something like that, because otherwise why would Lando and McLaren even mention it? It would have been dealt with in private and then there would have been no need to discuss it. Because Lando, the other drivers have got plenty of money. That wouldn't really do a thing to try and change his behaviour. For Lando to assert that this is happening through the end of the year and that the team did hold him accountable, but then stopping short of describing what the remedy actually is, that mix of ownership and vagueness is typical F1 damage control. You know, the whole thing of, we discussed this internally, that kind of chestnut that we've heard time and time again, ad nauseum, where Oscar has been dominating the social media feed. He has been the centre of attention, whereas before it had been mostly Lando coded, sometimes it was with both drivers, and on top of that, Lando is the one to admit fault, whereas Oscar is just saying, I'm quite happy with what happened, everything's good, let's move on. So it just feels like everything, in McLaren's ideal eyes, has been wrapped up in a nice little package. But let's be real, it hasn't, because we're talking about it right now. Everyone's looking at the word repercussions and go like, what did you just say? And I think what will really sting for Lando is that his whole brand has been built around being McLaren's golden prodigy, the face of their revival since 2019. To suddenly saying that he's been made accountable after being seen as a safe pair of hands and the team's bastion, that might hit differently now. It's not about the crash, but more about the loss of status potentially that could be had if he gets his elbows out, which results in contact like that again. You can really tell that Lando is really torn what to do. Had this been allowed to evolve organically since Canada, we'd be in a completely different world right now, a different reality. As for Oscar's posture, it's actually been sensible. It's played into his hands, whereas a couple of weeks ago, people were posturing him as some kind of crybaby, that he was making something out of nothing. Whereas now, actually McLaren holding Lando accountable, it has made it into something. The tide has very much turned with McLaren themselves saying that, Oscar, you were right to bring this up, and we have now dealt with this accordingly. Thank you for very much towing the party line, because that's what Oscar is doing. He's happy, he's not wanting to drag this on any further, whereas Lando, he's kind of left, looking down and looking a bit sheepish. But it is safe to say that McLaren have been very much dragged over the coals for the last 2 weeks. This has probably been the most aggravating fortnight the team has had to endure since the start of their ascension back to the top. It also goes to show that whilst the operation has had an historic resurgence, done in record time throughout the cycle, the transformation, I think, back to being a front-running outfit is not quite yet complete. There are probably some elements of the team which are yet to have fully matured, such as the handling of public relations issues on social media and what have you. The car, the engineers, oh, absolute top-notch, gems, really the best of the best, the crème de la crème. But everything else still seems a little bit less, sorted. It's kind of a throwback to what we saw in 2024 in a way, where we were absolutely amazed with the way the McLaren were kicking on and catching up to Red Bull. But there were still moments when we were just going, McLaren, oh, you messed it up. Messy strategies, especially around Silverstone, which completely annihilated the prospect of an easy 1-2 and potentially Lando's first win at the British Grand Prix. That came a year later. You'd had all the nerves on the pit wall, as in they were really paralysed with fear to try and actually make a call. And then the one time they did try and do so, which was Hungary, they got blasted for it. Lando really dragging it out. It felt like, They had the fastest car, but were they the fastest and best team? The jury was out on that one. It felt in 2024 that McLaren were a bunch of zoo animals trying to run its own zoo. Really, I just think for McLaren, despite the fact they have managed to achieve back-to-back titles, they managed to improve far too quickly for them to completely recalibrate, that there are still some things which are lagging behind. They rebuilt the car faster than they rebuilt the culture, with papaya rules now turning to pariah rules. McLaren's signature colour is now some kind of punchline, and I doubt that Bruce McLaren would be really pleased to see the team that bears his name being seen in that regard. And I think whatever repercussions that Norris might have coming his way could easily damage the prospects of his getting his first world title. I don't think it's going to be anything super overt. I don't think it's going to be a case of, right, Lando, you had your chance, but now Oscar is the one that we think is going to win the world title, so you better be a number 2. I don't think it's anything that drastic. But I do think they are going to be counting against Lando, since the eyes of the world are very much going to be on McLaren and their pit wall to see what they do if a similar situation to instances of the past arise. Now, let me make one thing very clear. Throughout the history of McLaren, especially during the Ron Dennis days, that team prides itself in being technologically equal. They, Lando and Oscar, I am quite certain, have the same fundamental car. Dennis himself prided, during the Hamilton-Alonso era especially, that they were both getting the same car. It's just the operational side of things which has taken a hit in recent times. If they just not put a term on it and made some catchy catchphrase or something like that, they could easily have just said, hey, so long as you don't crash into each other, you're good. And if you keep on doing it, then we're going to make things a little bit tougher. Say what you will about how Toto handled Nico and Lewis in 2016, it ultimately did lead to a conclusion, and it did give us some entertainment, despite the fact that Mercedes were equally as dominant as McLaren have been this year. We got a lot more fun out of it, whereas now, it just feels like, it feels kind of forced. And Max is the one providing the entertainment, with George acting as a backup dancer. So, okay, what kind of repercussions could there be? And yeah, of course, I have no clue as to what they actually are. We all don't. And Stella's not going to be saying anything about it in his own interviews. Lando and Oscar say they do exist. So let's just think about what we do know. Norris says he's been held accountable, Piastri confirms there were repercussions to be had, and the team is framing this as tightening how the two race each other rather than there being an actual public penalty that we can all understand. So here are 4 possible outcomes from those discussions which may reflect the situation that McLaren's trying to paint. I did touch upon it earlier in the video, but I think what has actually been said, the conclusion of these talks since Marina Bay, is that Lando is on his final warning. Strike 2, as it were. And I'm pretty sure that the Canadian Grand Prix was mentioned within those discussions from all relevant parties, and that maybe Lando, he's not being punished right now, but he's very much on a suspended sentence, probation, with stricter team rules as to how and when both he and Piastri can actually fight. Because after Hamilton and Rosberg clashed throughout 2016, Mercedes said both men were free to race, but imposed stricter rules with greater deterrence to contact. Basically, the team held a mighty stick aloft and threatened to bring it down should the two mix up again. And given the status of Mercedes back then and McLaren now, they do have the driver's attention since, well, they have the best car, to remind both Lando and Oscar about the terms of engagement now that they hopefully have been reset, and we're not going to be getting any sort of goalpost being changed, that we want this to happen. We do not want to kneecap your title bid, Lando, but you're not exactly making it easy for us. And Oscar's not making it easy for McLaren either, in having to constantly remind them and it being broadcast to the world. Because yeah, they've wrapped up the team title, but I think for the absolute ultimate gold standard, they would like to have the clean sweep in having a 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship as well. So if McLaren have handed down their verdict and that is going to be a zero tolerance policy going forward, this might explain why Norris is feeling a little bit subdued at the moment, whereas Oscar feels quite content and happy to get on with things. So in practice, this may mean that we're not going to be getting any dodgy moves going into turn 1 of lap 1. We're not going to be getting any daring dive bombs. So for the pursuit of fairness, Oscar has been guilty himself of making a couple of dive bombs, which the team really did sweat buckets over, such as Austria and Hungary. And if they do make contact, or if there's an off-track pass or something which the team deems as unfair, they immediately have to give the place back, or if they don't, there could be things that might go even further adrift. And this is all stuff you can talk about internally. You don't need to disclose these situations. You just need to remind them internally. This is why they're going for the whole, we discussed it internally, we've come up with a conclusion, we want to get on with things. They don't need to tell us anymore. Alternatively, there could be internal concessions being made within the garage which go against Lando Norris, or potentially the threat of them. And that could be really, really bad for Norris, since McLaren, at the same time as saying that there have been talks between their own two drivers, that they are very much saying that, oh yeah, Max Verstappen is very much a title threat. They are very aware of him being there. But I do think that maybe for the next couple of races, maybe while we're in the Americas, McLaren may decide to go a little bit more hands-off regarding papaya rules and just try and keep things simple, just draw attention away from it. Or it could be something subtle, like maybe extra towing duties at tracks like Vegas or Mexico, or Lando loses the right to call who gets to pit in first like we've seen in the last couple of races, that kind of stuff. Subtle things, dutiful things. But the drivers will feel those things very, very clearly. They would feel the burn with those actions, whilst the casual fan may not pick up on them, or it may not even be broadcast. That would be the ideal outcome for the team, that the masses don't pay attention to it or they don't notice, but I think what we've really realised in the last few years, with the amount of content that we are actually having access to, be it F1 TV or otherwise, there will be a few fans that will pick things up, broadcast it out on social media before F1 TV can actually then banhammer it into oblivion, but it's too late. People will then know the truth, and it will then henceforth disseminate. But as far as McLaren are concerned, they don't need to talk about it. They don't need to wax lyrical about it. They just need to say that the matter is closed and we are happy with the conclusion and both drivers now know where we stand. But I do think these little things will make Piastri a little bit more of a happy camper to try and dispel all the talk about him potentially cutting his losses and leaving the team, because say what you will about what's transpired in the Palou-Brown case, Piastri has very much shown that he is a hotter ticket than anyone at McLaren ever anticipated back in 2023. I still very much say, Jeddah qualifying made everyone sit up and take notice in what Piastri was able to do in that version of the MCL60. But the reality is that no matter what McLaren does, they will never be able to master equality, because every single thing they do, every pit call, every radio message, always becomes a debate and will continue to do so about whether it's biased or not because of the perception of this being Lando's team. Because no matter what you do, there will be certain circles that will say that there is proof that Lando is the favourite. And then there'll be other circles saying, you see, McLaren really think that Piastri is the future. You remember all of that discussion when there were all those melodies going on and Stella was going like hiding his smile, and then Zach going like, when Oscar won the thing. Those little micro actions people pick up on and go, there's a favourite! And McLaren are manifesting this. It's out of control now. It's completely inescapable. Don't you see? It's tribalism, and McLaren cannot defeat tribalism because it's human nature. Another quiet tool could be some sort of trigger, similar to a final warning, but something that could be felt almost as soon as the transgression occurs and McLaren declares a verdict on the fly, such as one more major touch perhaps could mean automatic team orders take place for the rest of the race or longer. No takebacks. That could be easily a deterrent that has some really nasty gnashes on them without McLaren having to broadcast a punishment. And I do think it fits with Lando's comments saying that whatever has happened after that meeting, he is going to feel the effects of it for the rest of the season, and Piastri actually feeling quite satisfied with the outcome. Whatever we think, Oscar has been just wanting parity and clarity, and Lando has had his own fair share of comments wanting the same thing. They both want to win this World Championship fair and square, because if they don't win fair and square and there's the perception of them being gifted it, it'll be forever tainted. And a first World Championship surely is a really special badge of honour for either one of them, in their mid-20s, with plenty of time to maybe try and add a couple of more. But hey, with one World Championship, that's enough to cement them in the history books, especially for Piastri, because it's been a very long time since an Australian won a World Championship. And Mark Webber, he came close, but no cigar. And then maybe it might bestow him the greatest honour of it all, a cameo in a Bluey episode. And if you're wondering why a grown man like me watches Bluey, I have an 18-month-old. That's why. And I think another thing they're wanting to do is just wanting to instill the idea that Oscar and Lando are going to be here for a very long time. Once again, trying to make it clear that no one else can hand them hands off. Yeah, they want to restore that particular status quo. And then finally, it could be the most boring outcome, and that could be just extra duties behind the scenes that we don't see. You know, having to do more engineering meetings, more time in the simulator, maybe a few more media days that maybe add to the mental load that Lando has going into the final few races of the season, extra distractions when he probably doesn't want them. On their own, these probably wouldn't change the public demeanour, and you do sense that Lando does enjoy doing sponsorship work and media stuff. But as part of a probation package, this does reinforce the message that the margin for error with your teammate is now smaller than ever, without going full draconian. So these ideas that I've posed to you, I think they make sense because of the fact that we've not heard about any financial penalties or any clues as to what these penalties could be. These are not major events. We are not going to be saying, we believe that due to the fact that Max Verstappen is a major threat to the world title, we are giving preferential treatment to Oscar Piastri. They're not doing that, nor are they absolving Lando Norris of any wrongdoing. They are very much saying that we've had a meeting and we have now declared that Lando indeed was at fault for that particular situation. And even though it's good to see that they are actually addressing the situation where McLaren has been in crisis mode, you do feel like, really? This should have really happened after the Canadian Grand Prix. With the information and evidence we had to hand, with the fact that Lando took himself out, that they very much lost points, you'd be thinking, okay, to go with this route would make sense that there would be repercussions. That would be perfectly valid. But it happened after Singapore. When both drivers were still in the hunt, they won the constructors, they came third and fourth. It wasn't that terrible. Yeah, Oscar had every right to feel aggrieved, and it has become very clear that the investigation has thought as such, but you just feel like the outcomes should have happened the other way. But I do think that Norris has felt the burn from all of this, but it's a very discreet burn. That it's a case of, well, I don't have as many assets and facilities that I had to hand as previously, and if this happens again and I'm found at fault, then it's only going to get even worse. So he's got to keep it clean, and he's got to do most of this on his own without the team being able to help him, because everyone's going to be going, I'm watching you. That would make Norris more careful and less combative in tone, because that is something I noticed as well. It reminded me of the stark difference in tone he had from last year's Austrian Grand Prix, when Norris was really assertive, defiant even, about how he felt when Max and he made contact at turn 3. You remember that, right? We all thought like, yeah, let's go, Lando! Yeah, you're feeling really punchy! And then at the British Grand Prix, he held his hand up, he apologised, the tone was completely different. It left everyone with emotional whiplash, thinking, what happened here? We felt the same thing again between Singapore and Austin. In the media day, Lando's all apologetic about what he did and holding his hand up again, whereas back at Singapore after the race, he was punchy. He was thumping his chest. He was saying, yeah, I did what I did. I went for the gap, which I'm expected to do, given my situation in the championship. And everyone was like, yeah, Lando, there we go. It just feels like we've experienced that same emotional whiplash again. And I'm not saying that this is Lando being a wet blanket or anything like that. Now that we know the context of papaya rules, and we didn't at that time in 2024, that it again had been a situation where Lando had been himself dragged over the coals internally, and then had to be told to change your tone to the media, mister, or else there'll be further consequences. But this whole situation has given Piastri visible fairness without throwing away either title shot, and it does match how top teams have handled similar situations in the past, but I can equally understand why people would be surprised in the way Lando carried himself throughout Thursday of this week. That something so significant to the course of the championship was imposed at this point and not back in the summer, when McLaren definitely had the rest of the grid in their place. And with what Lando's doing, it could easily be a whole bunch of nothing. This could easily be just a cheap insurance policy to just act like he is sorry, act like he's guilty to the world, say all of this, keep your head down for a few weeks, and then everything will be back to normal, and it'll be once again all guns blazing for the championship fair and square, matey boy. And throughout all of this crisis management on McLaren's part, even if they are able to find some sort of an outcome, the damage, I think, is done. Verstappen has sensed a weakness, and he is going to prey on it for the rest of the season. Even if he doesn't win the World Championship, he's got something to do, some sort of entertainment. All that Max probably wants is McLaren to just keep beating themselves, and so far they are very much obliging. And what I need you to do is maybe give this video a chance, because I and YouTube think you'll really like it. I'll see you over there with maybe a different clothing element on.